Ooh, that's loud. Hey, welcome to the Nurse Mark and the Green Nurse podcast, everybody.
Where we bring hope and inspiration for growth and healing.
You know, we often talk about things that people don't want to talk about all the time because
we need to have a conversation around those issues to decrease stigma for healing. I'm Sherri Tuckus, the Green Nurse.
I'm Mark Worcester, aka Nurse Mark.
And tonight we're going to be talking about drugs.
One of my favorite subjects.
And how the war on drugs is unwinnable. So before we get into drug history and the hypocrisy around that, we have some very special Nurse Mark and Green Nurse specials.
That we do, Sherri. So right now we're offering 20% off all Nurse Mark CBD with the code NM20. That's NM20. So go to www.nursemark.co and use that code. Also, I put together a package for stress relief, which includes a copy of my book. It includes CBD. And the big stress relief offer, it has a meditation program, a video program training on how to really get rid of your stress once and for all. And you can go to www.nursemark.co/stress-free.
Stress-free. Mm-hmm. Stress-free for me. And guess what else we have? We have another special. So basically 50% off Nurse Mark CBD if you book a consultation with the Green Nurses with or without a medical card. So go to www.thegreennurse.com, check out our patient services, and we offer medical card certifications in Iowa, Maine, Vermont, New York, Massachusetts.
Yeah, and soon
all over the
country have a medical card.
Yes,
consultations actually in all 50 states because let's face it, Sherri, people are using cannabis in the states that aren't legal.
Well, exactly. And basically, as nurses, we have a moral, legal, ethical obligation to teach people how to use this plant and how to use it effectively and safely, because we all have an endocannabinoid system. So for whatever reason you're using it for, you need to learn how to use it in a way that's appropriate for you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is part one in our discussion on the war on drugs. So I'm just going to give a quick review.
Yep.
Yeah.
Give us the backstory, Sherri.
Just the quick backstory, the bottom line. So reefer madness started in the 1930s. Harry Anslinger was the director of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics from 1930 to 1962. And he basically was the biggest supporter of prohibition. And the movie Reefer Madness that came out in 1936 is a result of his work. And it provided two very blatant messages. One, cannabis is evil. Tons of ridiculous quotes. Two, racism. According to him, only people of color were using cannabis and they did bad things. So in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act effectively prohibited all use of cannabis on the federal level. So fast forward to the 1960s, and we're going to talk about what happened from then to now.
Oh, Mark? This is my wheelhouse. I love history.
And I'm going to learn because I'm going to learn.
Okay, that mic's really, really loud, Sherri.
Okay.
You move the papers, that's really loud.
Okay. Got it.
I love it, but it's loud. Now, here we go. We're going to give you history. And as Sherri said, Anslinger, he ran that department from the 30s to 62. He was one of the longest serving government employees, if not the longest serving. And he really did a disservice. But the 1960s, of course, cannabis use increased, marijuana use increased because of the counterculture, right? So it started to be really prevalent in the United States. And, at that point, even the president of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, who, if you think about it, he was instrumental in a lot of really important things that happened in the country. He was president during a very tumultuous time. There were a lot of race riots. He passed the Civil Rights Act. He was instrumental in really guiding the country at a really tough time. And he said, and this is a bold statement for any president to say, He said, our continued insistence on treating drug addicts once apprehended as criminals is neither humane nor effective. The guy knew what he was talking about, and yet nothing changed. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk about how it increased. So where did it all begin? The war on drugs.
Yeah.
Oh, we got to talk about one of our favorite presidents, folks, Richard Milhous Nixon. Now, President Nixon, he ran his campaign in 1968 on, being hard on drugs and drug abuse and cannabis. And he thought that really they should be treated as criminals. They should be punished and their existence stamped out. He used fear mongering as a tool, just as Harry Anslinger did in the 30s. So he was really motivated to do that. Now, why would he feel that way? Because he was riddled with fear and paranoia. He would vent his frustrations at all groups that he considered others. That included blacks, Jews, foreigners, women, Democrats, Congress, anyone he perceived as a threat. And when you're paranoid, everybody's a threat. He would vent on. But who?
So, Mark, quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did he have clinical paranoia? Like, was this like a real thing that he had?
Hey, who knows? At that point, he did have an alcohol problem. So
yeah, that's interesting.
He didn't have a great presidency. If you remember, he's the president that resigned and flew away in the helicopter like it was the end because he didn't want to be prosecuted for his sins, right? So he just exited the presidency. And
see ya. Wow, that's a lot of groups to be paranoid.
Yeah, yeah. But the two that he really hated, were the hippies and the blacks. So
there you go.
John Ehrlichman, who was White House counsel at the time, was being interviewed in a major publication years later, and he said, "Listen, the whole aim of the war on drugs was to persecute the hippies and the blacks." But we couldn't come out and say it. So what was the only way we could get at them? Drugs, because they were both using them. And so that's why we did what we did. And there it is, plain and simple. So it's funny that a president who extracted the country from one unwinnable war, which was the Vietnam War, Nixon got us out of that. Johnson said, "I'm done. I'm not running for re-election. Sorry, folks. I've had it. I've had enough." He walked away, and so Nixon won that election in 68. So he got us out of the Vietnam War, but then he started what is the longest war that the United States has actually been in. And it really has been run as a war. You think about it, we've been all over the world, all other countries, meddling in their affairs and really just persecuting people and putting people in jail for how long now? Since 1970?
1970.
1970. Yeah. So why did Nixon in 1970 pass the Controlled Substances Act? What really pushed him to do that? Because it was a real tool that the DEA still uses today and the FDA use to schedule drugs. And it's where, we really are pushing for these drugs like cannabis and psilocybin and others that are shown to be effective medicines now, right? We're on the cutting edge. And when we know that they're medicines, everybody's working to get them descheduled. Why did he do that? Well, it's really cool. And I think I talked about it on another podcast earlier. Timothy Leary, if you remember Timothy Leary, he was a Harvard professor, right? He's a Harvard professor in the 60s, who in the early 60s did research at Harvard on psilocybin and LSD because they were legal at that point. And so he dove into psychedelic research. He was a psychologist, and he really believed in the power of those psychedelic medications to really treat people at a base level and have an impact on their lives. Well, Mr. Leary was caught at the Mexican border in 1968 with marijuana. He was arrested. And so he was prosecuted by the federal government. And he took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and he won. He won the case, and the Marijuana Tax Act was rendered useless. The Supreme Court said, You cannot self-incriminate, so your Fifth Amendment rights would be violated if the government prosecuted you on that particular charge.
Wow.
So there was a period of time where the Marijuana Tax Act was not enforceable, and it was done. So, of course, President Nixon had to scramble because this was a real problem for him because he couldn't prosecute these people anymore. And so they passed the Controlled Substances Act.
And that was in 1970, right?
That was. Yep.
Right. So what was that all about?
That's where they scheduled drugs. Go ahead, Sherri.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so when they scheduled, I was just going to ask you, how did they just determine what drugs were scheduled and what weren't?
You would think in the country as great as the United States that we would enlist scientists in the medical community in deciding what drugs should be scheduled. So the way the schedule works, if it's Schedule 1, those are the drugs that they say have no medicinal use, are highly addictive, and can't be used safely under the supervision of a medical professional. Okay, so those are 3 of the top criteria that they use to schedule that drug. So cannabis is on there. Sorry, it's a medication. It's a medicine. Bullshit. Okay, so we're working to get that off of Schedule 1. There's other ones, MDMA, which is proving to be very effective in mental health, in the mental health space. Psilocybin. There are other ones, methamphetamine that's on there, heroin. I could go with, those are probably supposed to be on Schedule 1, right?
Right.
But here we are. So how did they decide? Guess what? Congress decided. Politicians decided what should go on what schedule. So it's Schedule 1 to 5, right? So Schedule 1 is awful. It was not science or medicine that did it. It was politicians, which they did in 1937. It was politicians who put cannabis, made marijuana illegal. It wasn't the science community. The AMA, the American Medical Association, testified that they thought it was a stupid idea, but they were just, they were ignored. But here's a funny thing, Sherri. I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask you, what about alcohol and tobacco?
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Alcohol and tobacco did not make the list of drugs that should be scheduled, right? Although we both know that they're highly addictive and that they have no medicinal value, but somehow they didn't make the list that Congress put together.
It's so interesting. They can't be used safely under supervision.
No, they both cause cancer.
Well, it's just interesting, like how the medical use of alcohol, the medical use of tobacco, it just doesn't make any sense.
It's not. So that's where the disconnect came from, right? So those are the alcohol and tobacco are handled separately by separate governmental agencies because they're special drugs.
Right. Interesting.
We're making a lot of money off of at that particular moment. And there was a lot of lobbyists involved. It's just how it works, folks. We don't need to get angry about it. Let's just change it, right? Let's fix it.
Let's be loving and powerful and figure
loving and powerful and change all of this ludicrous madness.
Absolutely. So then there was a public declaration of the war on drugs in June 17th, 1971. So what does that mean?
That's when Nixon really came out and started to use the term war on drugs. And here's the thing. Although it's hard to declare war on a plant, right? The funding, the organization, the planning, the strategy, the missions looked exactly the same as what the government used in the Korean and the Vietnam War. The same mechanisms. So it really is truly a war. And Sherri?
Well, okay. So I know something happened. Nixon appointed someone. There's a thing called the Schaefer Report. So will you explain to us about that a little bit? I'm new to this. But it's important because it's part of the deal. It's part of what happened.
So President Nixon decides, hey, I need a little fodder for the cannon and for the war. Okay. So I'm going to appoint a commission to do a study on marijuana, and they're going to come back and tell me how awful it is. And I'm going to use that in the public domain to really get this war going. So he appoints his friend, former Republican governor of Pennsylvania, Raymond Schaefer, to head a commission. So here's President Nixon thinking, oh, I'm going to have my friend, a fellow Republican, head this up. I'm going to get the results I want, right? Well, March 1972, don't they actually produce a report where they didn't support legalization because they didn't want to support any legalization of any drugs into society. Okay, well, they have their opinions, but the commission said the commission is of the unanimous opinion that marijuana use is not such a grave problem that individuals who smoke marijuana and possess it for that purpose should be subject to criminal procedures.
Whoa.
Oh,
Whoa.
Tricky Dick was not a happy guy.
Wow.
Not a happy guy. He thanked Schaefer for the report and then summarily dismissed it. And they paid $1 million at that $1 million at that point in time for that report.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. So the war on drugs, head on, game on.
Game on, baby. So
right?
In 72, it's an election year. Again, Nixon used the war on drugs to stoke fear in the general public, and he won the election. Remember, these are really turbulent times after the late 60s, and again, all that racial tension and in the war, anti-war movement. You know, he used that to really fan the flames of fear.
And then, of course, he formed the DEA.
Yeah.
When was that formed?
1973, the DEA was formed. Now listen, at that point, when it was formed, it was 4,000 employees and a budget of 116 million, which at that time, in our dollars, they started with a budget of $557 million. Wow. That's how much he put into this war on drugs. And you know what?
That's a lot.
It's a lot of money. But guess what? In 2014, 11,000 employees and a budget of $2.8 billion. Imagine all the money that we've spent since 1973 on a war that has cost the American public trillions of dollars and put many, 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 many Americans, mostly of color, behind bars.
Yeah. Wow.
It's created this perpetual loop system.
It's the insanity merry-go-round.
That's it. It's time to get off, don't you think?
Totally time to get off. So, okay. So then there was Jimmy Carter. He did a couple. Yeah. He tried.
Yeah. So then when Nixon left, Jerry Ford was involved.
Right.
And, Jerry sort of had a funny place because he didn't really want to be president, and there he was. He's president. And, his wife, shortly after he was in the presidency, went through her whole issue with alcohol, right? So he's living with a drug addict. And so he's got someone in his family who's got a drug problem, but he's persecuting this other group of people for drugs, right? So he's in a tough spot. So he really didn't do much, right? But Jimmy Carter gets elected. Now, Jimmy wasn't for legalization, but he was totally for getting rid of the penalties associated with it, right? He didn't want people to suffer. And this is what he said. He tried to decrease the federal penalty to a fine rather than a criminal penalty. And so he stated penalties against possession of a drug should not be more damaging to an individual than the use of the drug itself. And where they are, they should be changed. And nowhere is this more clear than in the laws against the possession of marijuana in private for personal use.
Wow. And then we tried. And then, of course, we have the next era of just say no.
No. Oh, then we get into the real, firing up of the war on drugs when Ron and Nancy gained the White House. And of course, Nancy's famous Just Say No program. And she had been anti-drug for a very long time. When he was governor, she worked in California against anti-drugs policy. And so she was very active. And so Just Say No and the DARE programs, which were abject failures.
Wow. I'm going to talk about the DARE program. I just have to pipe in with that.
Yeah, go.
So, it was interesting when I was teaching my kids about cannabinoid therapeutics and I was writing the handbook for the Green Nurse. I wanted to make sure that they could understand it. So all age groups could understand it. After I was done educating them, I didn't use the word marijuana. I used the word cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
And then afterwards, because they were paying attention, they didn't seem to get it until I said, "What do you guys think about mom being a medical marijuana nurse?" They kind of looked at me like, marijuana and cannabis is the same thing.
Words
because of what they had been taught.
Words
they hadn't been
important.
Yep. Really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I did too with earlier this year before COVID-19, I was working with 2 high school seniors. They did a capstone project and the project was on, could cannabinoids, CBD in particular, be an alternative to opioid use? And so it was very, very interesting how I did some educating with them. They created their project and then they came on the show. And I asked them questions to see what they had learned. And so it was really, really fascinating. And then to look at the DARE sheet as to how it exists now, we rewrote it
Right.
with the accurate information.
With the accurate information. Now,
with the accurate information.
Later, in the next episode on this particular subject, we'll talk about what's gone on since the 1970s forward. Like what's happened with the DEA and the FDA and the inner workings about how we've been spinning wheels since the 1970s. We've known that marijuana, cannabis is an effective and safe medicine. We've known in the scientific and medical community, but we've been spinning wheels, and we'll talk about all of that.
But the other thing too, so between now and then, what do you think the motivation is? What was I already know, but what was the motivation for this reefer madness? What was the motivation for the war on drugs? What was the motivation? Like, why?
Always racially motivated. Always. And it's about power
and money,
white power, white male power, and race. It's the underpinnings.
Yeah. So there was a couple questions here. Instead of, statements, which I like. Instead of defunding the police, defund the DEA.
Well, see, now that's going to be a really difficult, I agree, by the way, that's going to be a really difficult proposition, because if you've got 11,000 government employees that are in a very powerful position, pretty much operating on their own as their own little unit, similar to, like, I don't know, some other units in other countries that operate, very militaristically. It's going to be hard to get them out. I mean,
severance pay,
$2.8 billion. $2.8 billion.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and there's a lot of power. Very difficult. But imagine if we had put the trillions of dollars, Sherri, that we've spent on this unwinnable war. Imagine if we took that money and put it into social programs and into treatment for addiction. How about we give people hope for a better life?
Hope for a better life.
Right? Hope for a better life, a more opportunity.
Yeah.
It just makes sense instead of
totally makes sense. Yeah. Well, it's relieve suffering, improve quality of life. That's what the Green Nurse is all about. We're here to bring hope and inspiration for growth and healing.
Yeah.
So this has been an awesome session, Mark. But before we wrap up, we have some sponsorship opportunities.
Oh, we sure do. If you'd like to sponsor one of our award-winning podcasts, please reach out to us at info@thegreennurse.com.
And if you'd like to be on our award-winning podcast showcasing your products or services, also please reach out to us at info@thegreennurse.com.
Oh, yeah. Come on down.
Yes. And this is for patients that are out there. If you or someone you love is suffering from debilitating symptoms of chronic illness, or if you're new to cannabinoid therapeutics and you want to learn about how this plant and other progressive therapies can help you, visit us at www.thegreennurse.com.
And this is for the providers out there. If you're a nurse or a licensed health professional interested in incorporating cannabis education in your business or practice, please come learn about our mentorship and community at thegreennurse.com.
Awesome. And we make some guarantees, don't we, Mark?
We do. We guarantee to bring all of you hope and inspiration for growth and healing.
And to be even more cornier, we will hold your hand until you're ready to let go. And remember, everyone, it's about living your best life.
And being AFA.
And just in case you don't know what that is, it's absolutely fucking amazing. His
You are.
bestseller, his bestseller
Mhm.
on the Amazon book list. So go make sure you check it out. Thanks, everyone.